Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast, where we answer key questions in dating, relationships, success, and fulfillment, and explore the psychology of masculinity. Now, here's your host, world-renowned therapist and life coach, David Tian.
Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast. I'm David Tian, your host. In the previous two episodes, we've been exploring the natural confidence and courage and self-control that comes from training in the martial arts and from accessing the parts of us that are like warrior parts or fighting parts. And when it comes to the martial arts, in particular, the development of certain virtues such as perseverance, integrity, self-control, and instilling in us this lesson of the importance of skill. And in many cases, skill trumping talent, especially when you apply efforts over time or hard work or practice or training. And then, of course, facing our fears and making that a habit. And then finally, experiencing the results and rewards of long-term training and discipline. And all of that coming from embracing the journey of getting better at martial arts. And that is all in addition to just the sheer enjoyment of the activity of training, which for many people will be more enjoyable than standard weightlifting type of workouts or steady state cardio. And we also explored the downside, the dangers of an over-reliance on that warrior energy, or more specifically, a kind of killer instinct, especially as a case study in pro fighters, but also in anybody who relies a lot on that type of energy to get things done in their lives, to accomplish these goals, or if they allow these parts of themselves to set the big goals in their lives and spending a lot of their time or their lives devoted to achieving these goals and relying on that kind of killer energy to get there. In the long term, exploring, as we did in the previous episode, in long term experiencing burnout and a toxic imbalance in their lives. And now in this episode, we're going to be swinging in the opposite direction, in the other extreme. And I'm toying with the idea of naming this the art of loafing, or the importance of laziness or of leisure, something along those lines. And the main question being, who can best enjoy life? What type of approach to life maximizes or leads to the greatest enjoyment of life? Because the martial approach to life, especially exemplified in martial arts and in the warrior parts of us, or the warrior archetype, which I haven't discussed in these episodes yet, focusing more specifically in the last episode on the killer instinct, these are important parts of us that have a lot of power and resources that we can call upon in certain circumstances, especially for those parts of us that still feel the fear of physical safety, or that feel the fear that comes from being unable or not trusting enough in the self to control the anger that might be underneath. And this could come from the effects of abuse in childhood, or from bullying in childhood, being the victim of bullying or the victim of abuse. And I go into more detail on that in the episode, 2 episodes ago, that gets into the caveats, first of all, of especially childhood sexual abuse, but also the more severe the abuse is, the more that other interventions, such as interventions that teach or train mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation, how those might be more called for at the beginning. And then towards the middle stages, then the therapeutic value of martial arts can really make a big difference. But that training in martial arts and training in being able to control the killer instinct or control that warrior energy in you can go a long way to developing and encouraging the natural confidence and courage and self-control and self-reliance that comes from long-term training in the martial arts and fighting, in facing your fears, especially facing physical danger, and staying there at the edge of your comfort zone. A lot of that can contribute to building up this trust in yourself by your inner child vulnerable parts, when they're afraid of their own safety, especially physical safety, when that gets triggered because of growing up with bullying or growing up with abuse, trusting in yourself enough to relax because you've proven to yourself and to those inner child parts of yours that you have that self-control, self-reliance, that courage, that confidence that comes from this type of training. So that the outcome is a life lived without being sensitive to the fear of physical safety and just fear in general, knowing that you've got this. And when your higher self says to your vulnerable inner child parts when they get triggered that it's going to be okay, I'm here, I will protect you, I will take care of it, it will come from a place that makes a lot more sense to these inner child parts because they can observe or witness you having gone through these physically challenging training sessions over time and kind of proven to yourself and to them that you can do it, that you can rely on yourself, that you can control yourself, that you do have that courage to step up and step out of your comfort zone, which develops a natural confidence as a result of these experiences over time. And then if you extend this even further, that's what we're going to be looking at now in this episode, extend it even further into, well, you don't want to just be and only accessing this type of warrior energy all the time. Because as I pointed out in the last episode, over-reliance on this type of killer energy, regardless of whether you can control it, just over-reliance on it, making it sort of like your home energy all the time, instead of in short spurts or when needed, or just for that training session, for that 1 hour, 2 hours a day of training sessions, but always being there, which is sort of what I was explaining, one of the liabilities of doing this as a living if you're a pro fighter, that you'll then need to have a kind of come down process, in addition to when you're getting ready for a fight, a building up process, but now coming back to daily life, coming back to your loved ones, to your personal life, having a kind of come down process and realizing that those short bursts of warrior energy, as a result of all the training, so that you can control that, so you can turn on that killer side of you and modulate it and regulate it for specific purposes, whether it's for an actual physical fight, or it could be for business or sports or arts or music, whatever it is. Actually, those are short spurts. And your main way of being is calm and carefree and loving and joyful and really enjoying life. That's your main way of being. And it can actually happen so that you're able to experience as a default love, joy, fulfillment, peace, calm, confidence, as well as courage inside, without having to rely on a kind of physically taxing warrior or killer energy. And that's what I'm going to be discussing in this episode, kind of balancing it out with the further stage of treatment for those who are suffering still and feeling the symptoms of that fear, that's kind of background fear and anxiety as a result of toxic childhood upbringing or abuse or bullying. Okay, so I've got 4 points for this episode. And like I said, I've been toying with the idea of entitling it The Importance of Loafing, or The Art of Loafing, or Leisure, or even Laziness, depending on how you look at it. And then the big question that could drive or just ignite the episode's train of thought is, who can best enjoy life? And this is a major question, a guiding question in ancient philosophy. Who best enjoys life? What type of person best enjoys life? And there's a particular dominant strand in Asian philosophy, exemplified, in my opinion, by the Taoists, specifically the Zhuangzi or the Tao Te Ching, which really brings out the importance and art of loafing. And loafing being a kind of, in case you don't know what loafing is, loafing refers to the act of not doing any work per se, that it's more of just lazing about in following your heart's desires, in the sense of like leisures, just downtime. That's one way, that's a good way of putting it. Loafing in downtime. And it's important to think about downtime, because achievers, and a lot of my audience, maybe you are an achiever or have strong or dominant achiever parts in you, just as I do. Achievers started off very early on with, well, it's actually a coping strategy to deal with trying to get attention, approval, love, acceptance from their parental caregivers very often, but from those who, when they were young, they needed to get that love and connection the most from. And their way of doing it was they settled on achieving as a kind of pleasing, or achieving as a kind of rebellion. But either way, eventually they just let go of the reasons why they started being achievers and just got caught up in achieving. And then it became achieving for its own sake, having lost the reason why they started achieving in the first place. And they never stepped back and asked the question, why? Why am I working so hard at this? Why am I achieving? It's sort of like, well, what's the point? And they've forgotten the point. Because for them, deeply, deeply ingrained in them is this toxic belief that's a deep insecurity, that unless they achieve or accomplish such and such, a moving goalpost, by the way, if you're an older achiever, you've experienced what it's like to not actually be able to enjoy for very long your achievements and needing to keep moving the goalpost further and further, and never actually then being able to rest for very long, for more than, I don't know, an hour, a day, a week, a month, before that restlessness and the anxiety of not being enough comes up again, and you got to go set the new goal and beat yourself up to get there. And eventually in your 40s or maybe earlier, burning out, and maybe then asking the big questions of, why am I doing this at all in the first place? Will this really bring me what I really want? And what you really want is a feeling of worthiness. And the reason why you want worthiness is because then you think that you will be loved and happy and fulfilled. So how about instead you start with the aim in mind, the final aim, which is fulfillment, and fulfillment coming from happiness and love, especially, and start there. What actually brings fulfillment, or what actually brings happiness? And now we have started where Aristotle was, asking the very same questions, as all great philosophers, and especially in the ancient times, did. What's the point of life, and what will bring enjoyment of life? What will bring happiness? And happiness defined not as pleasure, as many people think of it in the 21st century, kind of watered down and dumbed down the idea of happiness into just mere pleasure. But maybe this word fulfillment more accurately captures what a 21st century person would think of it, ought to think of it as. Fulfillment is a much bigger thing. It includes calm, peace, contentment, but also joy and fun and, fulfillment, excitement, meaning. What would bring fulfillment? And there's actually quite a lot of research in this relatively new field, though it's been at least 2 decades now, when there was actually 3 decades since serious research began in this field, called positive psychology. And in positive psychology, they're studying the positive parts of psychology, like happiness and love and fulfillment, what actually makes our lives enjoyable. And in positive psychology, you learn all kinds of things that have been studied and shown to result in consistently human fulfillment. And I'm going to cover some of those. There are 3 things. This is the first point. The first point is start with fulfillment. And then I'll point out 3 major ways that the research has shown that we can guarantee our fulfillment, or are the points that most likely will lead to fulfillment in life. And it's really important to pay attention to the research, because the research actually shows us that the things that will bring us fulfillment in life are not the things that achievers are generally aiming for. So success, especially wealth and short-term pleasure, generally will not bring fulfillment, and will in fact waste a lot of your time, in the sense of you can spend a lot of your life devoted to something that actually in the end, and during the whole thing, during the journey, and even if you do succeed, doesn't bring you fulfillment. And another example is status, which doesn't bring fulfillment. And another example is just pleasure. Success and status can afford you pleasure, but pleasure, after a very short period, doesn't bring fulfillment. Now, fulfillment requires some pleasures in it, and there is pleasure in the fulfillment, and pleasure is incredibly subjective. So if you train yourself, you can find pleasure in many, many things that you don't, for achievers, don't think that you could derive pleasure from. Achievers generally make it very difficult for themselves to experience pleasure, and they make it almost impossible for themselves to experience fulfillment. They do this by narrowing that window or filter by which these experiences can come into their lives and give them pleasure and give them fulfillment. And instead, they make it incredibly difficult for that to happen. So the first thing to notice is don't get caught up in the trivial questions. Like, how do I get more success? How do I make more money? How do I bang more girls? How do I get more sex? How do I get more pleasure? Because those will catch you up. There's a trap that will not lead to the thing that you really want, which is happiness, fulfillment, love, joy, peace. And just realizing that and starting from the end goal and working your way backwards can free you from the toxic burdens that achievers take on uncritically, unconsciously, that they took on many, many years ago, decades ago, that they've forgotten about. And they're still laboring under those pretensions, under those false assumptions, under that false information, really, about what will bring them fulfillment and happiness and love and joy and so forth. And so now bringing in an understanding, taking into account the new research now as a grown-up right now, you can replan and remap your way of approaching life in such that you can actually enjoy it in the now and not have to put it off until some far off goal is finally accomplished, only to discover that far off goal, once it's accomplished, hardly brings any fulfillment or happiness at all, and is only a momentary pleasure. So the art of loafing. Loafing is really important. And I just want to make this really clear, because this is the main point of this episode, that it's been 30-something episodes, and I've been pointing out the dangers of burnout for achievers, entrepreneurs, all kinds of other achievers, a fighter being a particular type of achiever, and warrior and all that there's burnout. And one of the most powerful antidotes to this is appreciating, trying to do nothing. And this is the Taoist principle, the art of doing nothing. And that's not a popular translation in Chinese studies for the Taoist principle of Wu Wei. It's often translated something else, because usually the people translating it are professors or academics, and they're achievers. So they don't like the idea of doing nothing. They call it something else, like effortless action, which is partly true. Depends on what they're trying to get at. Wu Wei is a kind of flow, but it's even deeper than that. But just on the bare translation of it, just the bare meaning of it, it does mean non-action, just those two words, the negation of action. And part of it is embracing the Taoist point of actually not doing anything. So actually taking some leisure time. And for those who are in creative pursuits who require their imagination, anybody who works in innovation, you already know this. So those of you who are more pencil pushers, and probably don't see yourself as that, but if you're just grinding, just trying to get more work done, and your work doesn't require much creativity or imaginative thinking or innovation, then you may not have noticed this. But if that's the type of work you're doing, there's a real ceiling on how much you can succeed in life. So one thing that if you're a middling achiever and you want to become a more successful achiever, one thing to notice is that you should schedule and block out a lot more time to do nothing. And you might notice maybe at other times of your life when you had more freedom, maybe in university, though some people, depending on how they approach their university studies, they didn't have much of this downtime. But maybe you can recall a time in your life when you had a lot more downtime. And in that downtime, you allowed yourself the luxury, so to speak, of thinking of the more important, deeper questions. So instead of rushing about trying to check off items on your to-do list, you actually take the time to just daydream about what is really important to you, because that changes as you evolve as a person, what you really enjoy, and giving you the time, the leisure, the space to be with yourself and to have the downtime, the time itself to explore the things that bring you pleasure, that can actually lead you into flow. So the positive psychology research has shown that there are very few factors that actually consistently lead to human happiness or human fulfillment. And one of those few factors that is actually within our control that will lead to fulfillment and happiness is flow, the state of flow and activities that bring you into flow. And most people who work at a job for a living, most of them don't experience much flow in their day jobs. They're doing the day jobs to make some money, and that's fine. But if you're just caught up in doing this day job that's not very fulfilling so that you can make a bunch of money, so that finally, after you make a bunch of money, you can finally retire after a certain point, after making some millions, and then do the things that you really love to do. You probably don't even know what those things are if you've been just slaving away at your day job, trying to save up some money. You probably don't even know what those are. Maybe you're just thinking, I just want to sit on a beach. I just want to rest. Most achievers, by the time you hit your 30s, those achiever parts of you don't even really know what they want to do. They just want to rest because they're exhausted. And maybe that's what they need to do. Actually, that is what I'm suggesting they need to do more of, except don't wait until the end when you're finally retiring at 65, 70 or whatever. People are retiring later and later in life and not allowing themselves the joy of enjoying their lives, but instead slaving away continually, unthinkingly, unreflectively for some far-off goal that may never be attained or may never come. For most achievers, it's in those times of loafing, of downtime, of leisure, of having nothing pressing to do in particular, but sort of just following your heart's desires, your whims, and noticing inside in yourself your thoughts and feelings about what you really enjoy doing, what brings you enjoyment, what your real preferences are and desires are, what your big dreams are, and allowing yourself the freedom to think big. That requires downtime, just being with yourself, not rushing and running errands or doing your data entry or to-do lists, but just taking some time for yourself. That gives you the freedom of mind to find those things that bring you flow. And another thing is, you'll discover if you stay with the art of loafing long enough that there is an art of it to it, that just as the ancient poets and not so ancient poets have just know and discovered, that just in the simple, the mundane, the ordinary life, the simple, the plain, the ordinary, we can discover the greatest amounts of pleasure. That fulfillment comes not from slaving away at some far-off goal, hoping that at the end of it we'll finally feel worthy. That's a lie. That's a big trap. That's the achiever's trap. And the myth of achievement that I've been addressing many episodes towards. But instead, taking a note from the poets, from so many ancient philosophers, that available to us in our simple, our plain, our ordinary day-to-day life are experiences that if we attune to them, if we are mindful of them, if we pay attention to them, if we focus on them, they alone can bring us these pleasures and the enjoyment of life. That won't be available to us unless we stop our striving and pause. Preferably pause for longer than a moment. Maybe you can take an entire day. Maybe you can take an hour or two each day to let your mind wander. Maybe you can just only do it in your meditation. So for hardcore achievers like how I used to be, you can barely afford what you think you can barely afford, 20 minutes a day for meditation. Fine. In those 20 minutes, allow your mind to just wander and just notice those thoughts. Don't meditate so that it will make you richer, though if that's what you need to do to get started, that's fine. But hopefully you'll reach a point where you will discover the intrinsic pleasure of just sitting with yourself and allowing your mind to wander and flow and roam where it may, and noticing that you have the resources within your own mind of discovering and experiencing all the fulfillment, the joy, the happiness that you've been slaving away for so long and putting off and not allowing yourself the permission to do it, to experience it. Do you struggle in your interactions with women or in your intimate relationship? Are fear, shame, or neediness sabotaging your relationships or attractiveness? In my Platinum Partnership Program, you'll discover how to transform your psychological issues, improve your success with women, and uncover your true self. Get access to all my current and future online courses by applying for the Platinum Partnership today at davidtianphd.com/platinum. So the first point is to start with fulfillment and happiness and ask yourself, what would actually make me fulfilled and happy? And what does the research say about that? Rather than taking it for granted that success and status will bring it, because it won't. That's what the research says. Beyond a certain amount, like a relatively medium amount of success, of status, will lead to some pleasure, but it won't lead to greater fulfillment beyond that. Then it's a declining returns, and then it becomes a waste of time. And now you're slaving away for no good reason, when you can just pause and realize all that you need to find fulfillment and joy and love and happiness reside within you. Now, this is an advanced lesson, I suppose, for those who are still deep in their trauma. So this is episode 30-something, so I think it would be fun to stretch out and do one like this to point out these deeper truths. If, however, you get easily triggered and your anxiety comes up easily, or you're very fear-driven, then you should listen to the earlier episodes. But for those who have this relatively regulated, their fear and their anxiety relatively regulated, and they're hardcore in their achiever mode, I'm just pointing out that you don't need to attain that success in order to find that fulfillment and happiness and sense of worthiness. And in fact, if you can experience flow, and gratitude is another way of approaching it, in the present moment, just in the simple, the ordinary, the plain day-to-day life you already have, then you have already won the game of life. Because all of these other achievers slaving away for some far-off achievement are just hoping that at the end of that 30-year, 40-year journey of slaving away, they will finally attain what you already have attained right here, right now, in your mind, just by sitting with yourself or just by taking a walk in a beautiful park, just noticing nature, or in a pleasant conversation with a friend where you can go deep, or as surface level as you like, joking around over a drink in some nice weather, and that level of fulfillment is also available to you. Or you can experience enjoyment of life just in the movement of your physical body, or just being, or just reading a good book, or just listening to music that really moves you and that you can get immersed in. Or for those more advanced, mature people, the great joys of just looking in a child's eyes and seeing the full presence that they bring to life and being fully present with them. And just seeing life through their eyes can bring you, in that simple and relatively ordinary and plain experience of life, this full fulfillment and joy and peace and calm that achievers put off and don't allow themselves to experience. How many male friends I have who are fathers, who have kids, who don't allow themselves the vulnerability to be with their child and present with their child, and instead see themselves purely as providers, financially, materially, for the child. And that's their way of loving the child. No question that they love the child, but they don't have the emotional maturity or wisdom to realize that the child, more than those material things that you think are going to fulfill the child, more than that, the child needs, because the child does not live in the future, the child needs your presence. And even more importantly, you need your presence, because it's in the present that you actually experience life. You don't experience it in the future, because technically the future never comes. It's in the present that you experience life. But these achievers don't allow themselves to be present in the present. And because of that, they miss out on the enjoyment of life, slaving away at some far-off goal. Slaving, I say, because they don't really enjoy the activity, their jobs, or whatever the heck they're doing most of the time. And they're doing it unmindfully. They're doing it with their mind focused on other, sort of just in their heads, focus on some future worries or goals, putting off the present enjoyment for the promise of some future fulfillment. That, again, never comes, because the fulfillment can only come in the present, and it can only be experienced, therefore, in the present. And children, and maybe pets, have a really powerful way of bringing us back into reality, which is in the present. And hopefully, you will learn that lesson soon enough, maybe through this episode will help galvanize that realization for you, that It's in the present that we experience and therefore can only find fulfillment in the present. So that first point about starting with fulfillment and happiness, asking what brings fulfillment and happiness, what's the research shown? So it's not striving after success and status, that won't do it. So what is it? And the second point being flow, finding your flow. And there is a ton of research on flow. I am, of course, referencing Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's concept. This is now, how many decades? At least 3 decades of research that is almost incontrovertible on the power of flow. You can just Google it, capital F, flow psychology, and you'll see a huge amount of research and lots of pop psychology about it as well. So you can bone up on that. I've, in fact, created entire dating skills courses partly built around this concept of flow. So I'm going to kind of take it for granted here that you know what it is, and also in the interest of time. And the third point being finding freedom and control in your life, finding more freedom and control in your life. A lot of achievers actually don't have and don't experience much freedom. They're slaving away for 3 or 4 decades so that they can be free. Achievers or beginner achievers, think that creating a business or starting a business is a way to get more time in their lives. Which, if they were to stop and actually interview any serious or long-time or veteran business owners, who would be quickly disabused of that notion. But that's what they're aiming for. They want freedom, but they're doing it in a way that will guarantee that they don't have time freedom. And maybe if they can cash out and exit way down the line, then they can have freedom. But it's just the same. It's the same as slaving away for 3 or 4 decades at some corporate job, hoping for retirement funds. So then when you're old and wrinkly, finally being able to have the leisure time to sit on a beach. That's the old-fashioned way of approaching career. And I know there are still plenty of people who buy into that trap, and hopefully they wake up to the reality and the time-boundedness of that old model of career. But freedom, the more freedom that we allow in our lives, the happier we'll be. And the more autonomy, the more control. And so they're related. The freedom to decide for yourself how you will spend your time. The freedom to decide for yourself what you will eat that day, for instance. You can imagine in a school setting where you're not even free to choose what clothing you wear because it's a uniform, and what food you have because there's a meal plan, and it's just one meal plan. So you sit down and then you get served whatever meal it is that day. And then you have your regimented schedule, your school schedule that's just chock full, and it's not really decided by you very much, but by the school. And it feels good to be able to decide, for those who didn't have that, to decide what clothing you could wear, what you could eat, and what classes you would take at what times, doesn't it? Just having that freedom and the autonomy to decide within the very strict structure itself, just having that freedom to decide felt really good. And you wouldn't want to go backwards to having somebody else decide all of that for you, not for very long anyway. So a part of human psychology is that we derive fulfillment from being able to control, or even just having the illusion that we can control, as the research shows. So planning your life and designing your life in such a way that you maximize your freedom to choose what you do with your time is a way that will lead to more fulfillment in your life. So if that's what you're achieving for, there are probably, if you just put your thinking cap on, wiser, smarter, more optimized ways of doing that so that you don't have to slave away 30, 40 years in order to achieve it. You can have that relatively quickly. And then the fourth point being relationships. Relationships as the big risk, big reward factor that the research has shown. If you have a good relationship, and if you have good relationships, the quality and the quantity of your relationships, and most of it coming from the quality. It's better to have a few deep relationships than many superficial ones, but quality and quantity matters. But what it shows is if you have good relationships, that will be the biggest factor for your happiness. That will be the biggest contributor to your fulfillment in life, especially any intimate relationships where you experience love. Conversely, or on the flip side, if you have bad relationships, whether they're work relationships, friendships, in your intimate relationship, or maybe with your children, that will really tank. That will be the biggest contributing factor to your unhappiness, to your lack of fulfillment, to your suffering. And one thing you might notice about relationships is if you have a bad one, it kind of follows you around throughout your day, even if the person's not there, because you're just like ruminating on it all the time. So it's a big risk, big reward factor. And if you can figure that one out, it's the biggest reward. So just pointing out, that's point 4. And I have courses around, I'm just sharing the research, flow, autonomy, relationships, the 3 biggest factors that will lead to fulfillment in your life that are within your control. I have courses around all 3 of them. In fact, for flow, I have multiple courses. It's like lifestyle mastery, and then in the dating context, invincible. For freedom, autonomy, control, designing your life and lifestyle, I have a whole course, lifestyle mastery. And of course, for relationships, I have a whole course called rock solid relationships, because there is a skill set to achieving these, to creating these. So achievement in and of itself obviously is not bad. I've spent the last 2 episodes focusing on a particular type of achievement. But achievement that involves activities, or is primarily dominated by activities that aren't fulfilling or enjoyable for some far off goal, like 30, 40 years, whatever it is, whatever that timeline is, even 5, 10 years, putting off your present pleasure or present fulfillment for the hope of way down the line, some finally being able to be fulfilled. And that won't even come first. You're so exhausted. You just want to sit on a beach and do nothing. And then hopefully you'll find fulfillment and joy and love and peace and all of that. That standard way, or the old way of approaching career, is crap. And the achiever's way is a trap, because that success and status won't bring the fulfillment. It's a lie. Fulfillment can be found in the now by training other things that actually aren't what typical achievers do. So you might find flow in something that has nothing to do with your current day job, that you don't really enjoy this day job. And without the loafing time, without that downtime, you will never have discovered the thing that will really bring you fulfillment in the now, that thing that really will bring you the enjoyment of life, the thing that will bring you into flow consistently. And then similarly, if you don't have that downtime to dream, to strategize, to think more deeply and reflect on yourself, you won't be able to discover those areas in your life for which finding freedom and being able to control are most important. And then finally, if you don't have loafing time, you're not going to have relationship time, because intimate relationships are not optimized by strict agendas. You don't approach an intimate relationship like it's a business. You need a lot of being mindful and present and in the present moment so that you can actually enjoy it, and immersing yourself in it and forgetting about the anxieties that achievers normally have about the future. So just to recap, the things that bring fulfillment and happiness for most achievers will require some downtime to reflect on this big question, right? The who can best enjoy life. And the first point is start with the end in mind. Start with the fulfillment that you're actually aiming for, because that will redirect you in the right path, not the success status path that you slave away at, doing something you don't really enjoy very much, hoping that it will finally bring fulfillment at the end of the rainbow, the illusory rainbow there. But starting with it and working your way backwards. And when you work your way backwards, you'll discover the second point, which is flow. Consistently orchestrating your life so that you can consistently enter flow. The third is designing your life to maximize your freedom and autonomy and control of your time and what you do and who you spend it with. And that leads into the fourth, that relationships, especially your intimate relationships, are the biggest factor in your fulfillment. But it's also big risk, big reward. So you've really got to figure out that factor. And of course, I've got courses on all of these: lifestyle mastery, rock solid relationships, flow and dating is covered in Invincible. And you can get access to all of those if you just join the Platinum Partnership, which gives you access to all of the online courses. So I'll just end with one illustration by case study. And this is my client, Bob. And Bob came to me as a very successful financier. He was a trader at the global level. His line was more than 5 million a day that he was authorized to trade by his banks. And his desk was so high up there that I think he told me that there were only 5 other individuals in the entire world in his bank, which is a multinational bank, that was at that level. So if he got sick or he had to go on vacation, they had to get somebody else so he was tasked in a certain area, right? So somebody else from London would be or some task to handle his desk out in Asia. So anyway, this Bob was making multi-million-dollar year-end bonuses, and he'd lose $3 million in a day, and then next day make $5 million or something like that. And Bob discovered that his work, while it was exciting and adrenaline rushing, when we hung out, he would be on his phone checking the trading lines constantly. And by his late 20s, he was already burning out and already questioning the meaning, really, the bigger picture of what his work that he slaves away, 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week doing, what the point of it was. Because he was saying to me, all I'm doing is making these rich people richer. And I'm not really, he says, contributing to the things that really matter to him. And what he discovered in his downtime was that he actually enjoyed while he was loafing, he discovered that he really enjoyed making music, mixing music in particular. And he just wished he had more and more time to do that, but he couldn't. He had less and less time to do it. And one of the big lifestyle choices that he made when he got into a relationship was that he would start to plan his escape, his early retirement in his early 30s. And it took a while. It took over a year to plan that out. But then he did manage to exit that. And by that point, he had 2 daughters. And you should see the joy in his face, seeing him several months after he began his so-called early retirement, and is now managing his own private family fund and foundation, which is, I think he's got a team of just 2 other people, helping him with that. And it's relatively work-free for him. I think he mentioned something like just 2 or 3 hours of work on average a day. And settling down, so he's making a lot less money per year, a lot less. And I've seen this over and over, that guys who have a $250,000 a year job, and they're slaving away at that, had discovered that they were much happier and much more fulfilled doing something else that only made them $80,000 a year, and that they were happy to have made that shift. And Bob's is just a more extreme example of that, adding another, I guess, digit to that, but experiencing the happiness that comes from having the time to take his daughters to their recitals, to their practices, to their extracurricular events, to play on the playground with them and not be checking his phone, to spend quality time with his wife, take her out on dates and be fully present without checking his phone, and his friendships, and then to have work that has bigger meaning for him. Either it brings him greater pleasure, like his music, or it has deeper meaning, like his foundation work. And the amazing thing was, this realization only came as a result of pausing. And he has colleagues who he started with, same age, now in their 40s, who are approaching their 40s, who are still doing the same thing, burning out their private lives. They can't hold down a relationship. Of course, then they can't have children. And then to numb the meaninglessness of their lives, they drink or do drugs, or whatever it is that's typical of high-powered finance, as these guys age and hit that midlife crisis. And then maybe they will be forced to look at to ask themselves the questions that Bob, luckily, was already asking himself in his late 20s. And just going through that lifestyle mastery process, around which I've designed a whole course called Lifestyle Mastery. He was able to reorient himself, discover the more important priorities in his life, and give himself practice the art of loafing, enough to discover and prioritize the things that really brought him flow and meaning, and then was able to orchestrate his lifestyle such that he got that freedom and autonomy and control that would enable him to spend more time in his flow, on the activities that brought him flow and fulfillment, therefore, and the relationships in which he was able to give and experience love. And just that was worth so much money that he was able to take the loss in money because it was more meaningful than the money. And that's something that is like an achiever's trap, that you think more money will do it, more money will make me happy, more achievement will make me happy. And that's a trap. It's a lie. There are other things that will make you happy, yes, but it's not the things that you were brought up to believe. And many achievers, I use the phrase brought up, many achievers come from families that had a financial insecurity. As a result of this financial insecurity, they were fed lies that not conscious lies, the parents bought into these lies just as well, but lies born out of fear. And part of it is this middle class or lower middle or even upper middle, that these beliefs that are just false about what will actually bring happiness and fulfillment and the best ways to attain the money that would enable you, enough money to enable you to have the freedom, the minimum amount of money to have the freedom to lead into fulfillment, to choose what to do with your time and the people you spend time with and the activities that you do with your time, that you don't need that much. And that many guys making, $500,000 a year or whatever, or less, 6 figures a year, would actually be happier making 70,000, 80, 90,000, but doing something that is meaningful and that they really enjoy in the moment. So they're not putting off their present enjoyment for some future promise of fulfillment, but that right here in the present, here and now, they are having a life of fulfillment and enjoyment. Okay, so if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with anyone you think could benefit from it. And I appreciate all the feedback you guys have been giving me. And give us a rating on Apple Podcasts if you liked it. And I hope to see you in the next episode. And until then, thank you so much for listening. David Tian, signing out.